Thank you so much, Shireen. That's always an act to follow, following Richard from Carbon Tracker. It's an absolute delight to be here. Thank you to GEFI very much for the invite. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by two incredible activists from the region, Ed Tongson, who is the Sustainable Finance Lead from WWF Philippines, and Tata Mustasia, who's the Regional Climate and Energy Campaign Strategist from Greenpeace, Southeast Asia. I'm Amy Clark. I'm the co-founder and chief impact officer of Tribe Impact Capital. We're a global investor based in London, working with a range of wealth holders, specifically and only focused on moving capital in support of delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. I am going to ask Ed and Tata, rather than me try and do them justice, I am going to ask Ed and Tata to give a quick introduction to themselves, but really through the lens of the work that both Greenpeace and WWF have been undertaking in Southeast Asia for many years now, actually. Can you both just introduce yourselves, but also give us an overview of the work that you have been undertaking in the region, and also really importantly as well for the audience, how it connects climate and biodiversity into the financial and sort of policy decision making that happens in the region. Ed, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Thank you, GEFI and ICB for inviting me. I'm Ed Thompson. I'm the Sustainable Finance Lead. I'm working off Manila, and we're part of a regional project of the WWF, working with finance institutions and regulators. Our strategy are on two fronts. First is what we call greening finance, and the other is on financing green. So both use two similar words, opposite sides of the sentence. When we speak of greening finance, we look at how risks coming from nature and climate are minimized or addressed or managed by banks and financial institutions, meaning their lending and investing activities that leads to deforestation, nature loss, etc. Make sure that these potential risks do not turn up to be actual risks in their lending and investing activities. The other part is financing green, which looks at how financial flows and produce outcomes that are net positive, both for climate and for nature. So every year we score the banks based on those two criteria, on the degree of integration by financial institutions of these two aspects. On the same track, we also work with the regulators. GEFI is very much into that by scoring the legislations, the policies that we have with respect to incorporating ESG into the macroprudential work of the central banks. So that is in summary of what we do here in the region.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ed. I was going to say, I think we have a fantastic catchphrase for the GEFI conference, financing green and greening finance. I'm sure we will see that come up again in the future as well. Tata, talk to us about obviously the work that you do at Greenpeace, but also, you know, your role at Greenpeace and how that manifests in creating change across the region.
Thank you, Amy, for having me, and it's my pleasure to share here. My name is Tata Mustasia. I'm now a Greenpeace International Senior Campaign Strategist. Previously, I used to work for Greenpeace South Asia and Greenpeace Indonesia from 2016 to 2022 and 23, and since 2023 until now, I'm working with Greenpeace International. And yeah, actually, my role now is to support global campaign and also to support regions, in particular Southeast Asia and East Asia. And Greenpeace itself, we are working globally and also in Southeast Asia. We are working in the three areas for aiming to keep the temperature not exceeding 1.5 Celsius degree, and also to mitigate climate change. And we are working in the 3 areas actually now. The first is biodiversity. The second, we call it pillars. The first one is biodiversity. The second one, climate and energy. And the third one is social economy. We are seeing these 3 pillars are the key for us to address climate change as our mandate. And in doing so, and globally and also in Southeast Asia, we are undertaking various activities from advocacy, nonviolent direct action, research, policy lobby, and so on. And talking about Southeast Asia, Greenpeace is seeing Southeast Asia is really a key region, since there are a lot of challenges here, but at the same time, it means Southeast Asia provides the opportunity for us to address climate change. Southeast Asia, for instance, its economy is steadily growing now, and also if we are talking about, for instance, energy demand, it is also growing, and this is our challenge. For instance, if we are talking about energy transition as one key part of climate change mitigation, then we really have urgent and important need to transition from fossil fuels to clean and renewable energy. So yeah, so I'm here in Greenpeace doing, I guess, one of the most exciting work, but also the most challenging work currently.
Thank you, Tata. I was going to say, I think it's a joy for me to be on the call with you. I think you're both doing such incredibly important work, but obviously it is incredibly challenging as well. We're seeing this all over the world, especially at the moment with some of the levels of, shall we say, political delinquency that are being exhibited. Let's talk about some of those challenges, specific to the region, but let's anchor them in the challenges that specifically civil society organizations, so the Greenpeaces of this world, the WWFs of this world. What are some of those challenges that organizations like those that you work for face when you are trying to engage with and work alongside the banks, the asset managers, and the insurers, so the finance industry? Within the region? I mean, Tata, I'm going to come to you first. What are some of those challenges that you have faced and that you are facing working with the industry in the region?
Actually, if we are talking about the challenge in dealing with the industry, for instance, private sector, including the finance sector, I think we are now still facing a big gap of objective of industry. I call it private sector compared to for instance, Greenpeace as a CSO. That private sector is still the mainstream one. Of course, there is improvement, better development, but the mainstream one, I guess, we still have a challenge that the private sector is still focusing on financial profit, and yeah, and on financial profit, and very little minimum attention to the aspect of environment. So I think that's our major challenge currently, and yeah, I think that's we are facing now if we are talking about the challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Tata. And I think we'll come back to this because in what you've just described is a really, I think, quite a fundamental question, that is, what is profit, if not sustainable? So we'll come back to that in a minute. But Ed, similar question to you. What are some of the major sort of challenges that you have faced personally, but also that WWF has some of the big challenges of working with the industry. But also, where have you seen potential opportunities where both organizations come together in harmony, in agreement?
First, personally, I can speak from the Philippines. The Philippine financial institutions, unlike their foreign counterparts, are mostly regulatory driven. If we look at how our banks adhere to the new sustainability reporting guidelines, it will take a push from the regulator for them to act. I mean, they're not as outward looking or market driven as Singapore or Malaysia or other parts of Asia. Here it's very much, it entails a push from the central bank. And secondly, the reports that are coming out, the sustainability reports that are coming out are mostly very glossy, very positive. There are positive spins in those reports, and it sometimes leads us to suspect some greenwashing is happening. There's still a lack of transparency in terms of the risks, in terms of how they are greening the finance, so to speak, how they are allocating capital to brown versus green sectors. Hopefully, the new reporting guidelines will address this, but until that time, when these new guidelines come out, we still have the business as usual of having reports becoming more like PR, publicity materials, not really for use by investors or critical reviewers of these investments. So I would say those are the two main problems that we have. So greenwashing, I think, is regional. It's not only unique to the Philippines, but it's regional because unless we have the same standards of reporting regionally, there's this disincentive to be the first mover when it comes to disclosing your risk, all the negative impacts that you have on your portfolio. So it takes standardized rules to equalize the playing field.
Yeah, absolutely, Ed, and you will both know this. I mean, unfortunately, greenwashing is not just a regional issue, it's a global issue. We're now seeing the polar opposite, which is green hushing, as a result of some of the political discourse, especially when we look a little further west. Some of the political discourse coming out, people now actually not talking about what they're doing, so it becoming quite difficult to work out exactly what is happening as well. So it's a challenging environment that we work in, and I think, you know, if we look at both the finance sector at large and then we look at government, government's role very much is to create that foundation, you know, the concrete bottom, the minimum set of rules, the minimum level of performance that we expect. And businesses then innovate. At least businesses should be innovating in then defining what the ceiling looks like as well. The challenge I think that we have with both financial institutions and governments is that often they're working at a slower pace than we might hope that they would be working at. You know, we don't often see the equivalent of polo ponies out there. And yet a lot of the organizations like Greenpeace, like WWF, tend to operate a little bit more at speed. You know, there's more pace, there's more urgency. That can cause tension between the sort of the three parties, actually, you know, the organizations like your good organizations that you work for, and then government and finance. How do you set about trying to reconcile some of those differences? And I'm going to ask you first, Ed, how do you work in that environment where there is real urgency for the changes that are required, and you're pushing and, you know, driving for those, but you're in an environment where both government and finance is a little slower, a little bit more sluggish?
Well, it took no less than a Mark Carney to tell the world that the tragedy of horizons is in place. I mean, businesses have 5 to 10 year time frames, but any inaction done now or failure to commit action now will have irreversible consequences in 2030, 2050, and especially 2100. So the time horizons do not match. That's why there's a tendency for governments, especially the private sector, to foot drag. They call it kicking the cans, passing on the problem to the next group of board of directors and let them deal with it. So while I make the right pronouncements today, but I guess what needs to happen is these time horizons do differ, and the transition plans that are smart, meaning that are specific, realistic, and time bound, should be in place because that reconciles the different time horizons by both NGOs and government and also the corporates. So the emphasis on transition plans should be foremost. And these are pushed by civil society every April when we have the annual general membership meetings, especially for the banks who have still exposures in coal. So there is a intensification of the campaign during this time of the year, especially when the board of directors needs to hear from the shareholders what exactly the sentiments are. And I do emphasize that the church, 80% of the Filipinos are Catholics, and the church are one of the biggest influencers, if not one of the biggest depositors of church money in these banks. And the church is very much allied with the causes and the advocacies of the civil society organizations with respect to mining, coal, etc. So they do play a big part in moving these banks towards fulfilling what the church leaders say as how banks should drive away capital from negative activities towards more positive nature, positive activities. So the third encyclical, D2C, which was released by Pope Francis, gives good guidance on how the laity, the Catholic laity, responds to these different issues. And of course, banks have to sit and listen when the church begins to speak, because they do have a halo effect in this country. When they speak, it's really God speaking to them. So that's how the halo effect works out here. So
It's
there.
fascinating.
So
yeah, I mean, that's fascinating because you've raised, I think, a really, really important point here, which is about other stakeholders and influential stakeholders as well. And I want to, Tata, I want to come to you because during COP16 in Cali in Colombia, and during the finance COPs, for example, in the recent one in Baku in Azerbaijan, we have seen, I think, a marked increase in the number of indigenous peoples coming to these events and trying to get, a seat at the table, trying to get their voices heard. And the message has been really, really loud and clear from them and from a range of other stakeholders, but specifically from them, that the human cost of inaction on climate and biodiversity is profound. And yet there are solutions and there is wisdom in these communities that is just not being harnessed. At best and at worst, these communities obviously are being displaced as well. Do you think, this is quite a big question, Tata, and I apologize in advance, but do you think that the financial institutions and governments in the region, A, fully grasp the scale and the urgency of the crises we are in, but do you also think that there is enough work going on to engage with these communities, to really understand what is happening and also to harness that collective wisdom?
I think current characteristic of climate action globally, but also regional in Southeast Asia is we see progress, sometimes significant, but it's still not far from sufficient. And also, I guess if we are talking about the inclusiveness, if we are talking about the indigenous people as one of the most impacted group from climate change, there's still a huge gap of inclusion and inclusiveness, and also the action from the financial sector. I think we should see the fundamental problems of our current economic development, because we know that the current climate change is rooted in the current model of economic development. There are three things that we need to address. The first is we still not really take into account the externalities, the negative externalities from our economic development, including, of course, investment, financing. We still we don't take into account in sufficiently the negative externalities, for instance, for indigenous people, for our biodiversity, for our climate. The second one is there is no freedom of opportunity, and also it is also related to indigenous people as well. For instance, economic development is being conducted in one area, and it doesn't really involve the indigenous groups. And the third one, I think this is the problem in Southeast Asia as well, is we see many times that the regulatory process, policy making, is driven by vested interests. So I think there are three things that we need to address to really make fundamental change in our efforts to tackle climate change.
Perfect. Thank you, Tata. I want to ask you both quite a big question now, which is around the opportunities. So what has worked? We know there are a lot of challenges. We know that working with the finance system, no matter where you are in the world, but working with the finance system comes with a unique set of challenges for organizations like those that you both represent. But where have you seen it work? And also what works? Ed, I'll come to you first, actually. Oh, Ed, you're on mute.
Yeah, there is evidence that financial flows goes into sectors when there are financial incentives involved. And the case is true for renewables. When we implemented the FIT, the tariff, feed-in tariffs in the Philippines, so that gives incentives for investors to enter into new space. And over time, the rates were at par with market, so those incentives were removed after such time. So that's how markets work in areas, new areas, in pioneering areas. And we see this will happen also in other sectors such as EVs, in mass transportations, in power generation. So the public-private partnership program in the Philippines is quite very mature, and in water, tollways, in other infrastructure sectors, the private sector has come in a big way. Now we just need to expand this to other sectors, especially sectors that deal with climate adaptation, because that's where the focus of the government lies, and that's where most of our losses are coming from. So those are areas which are now being the focus of private sector investments, and how economic incentives could be in place to be able to attract these types of investment, but not only locally, but from outside the country. So there's, I think, there's sufficient experience from the part of policymakers to learn the lessons of the past and make use of these lessons to expand investments in other areas. So I think that's key in attracting private capital. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ed. You've raised actually something really interesting, which is this notion of public-private partnerships. And I was talking to the UN team, actually, the country team down in Colombia a couple of weeks ago, about precisely this. So Tata, I wanted to ask you the role of the multilateral development banks in stimulating some of these public-private partnerships and the opportunity they play in potentially de-risking some of the investment opportunities down there. How significant a role do you think they are currently playing kind of within the region versus what they could play? And do you think that is one way, one opportunity in which we can stimulate greater proactivity and greater levels of engagement?
I think if we see the potential role of multilateral development banks in Southeast Asia, it has a big potential because what we need in Southeast Asia is signal. I mean, also from global level that we are really shifting. So we need we in Southeast Asia need to see the real shift. I mean, the signal from the global level, and I think to some extent it can be reflected in, for instance, financing from multilateral organization, multilateral development banks in Southeast Asia. Then I believe it can then shift the financing by private sector internationally and domestically. Also, since the main challenge of the acceleration of climate action in Southeast Asia, I guess now it's no longer about awareness. The awareness is much improved compared, for instance, 10 years ago, and it's still improving. The gap is in financing, and if we are talking more specific, then it's in innovative financing. How Southeast Asia can finance our transition innovatively, and I think this is something that can be played by multilateral development banks. And then the gap is also in the signal, in the clear signal that global community that and also Southeast Asia is really moving toward green sector, for instance, in the energy sector, toward clean and renewable energy. Now it's still mixed. For instance, I criticize the current financing from multilateral development banks, that in many ways they support green sector, but at the same time still support, for instance, fossil fuel. So it provides mixed signals for the public, for financiers, for investors that is not really in line with the acceleration of climate action, because our need now is not climate change, not only climate change mitigation, but also the accelerated climate change mitigation. I think that's the point.
Yeah, thank you, Tata. We're in an environment at the moment where I mentioned before, there are some significant levels of political delinquency, and historically there has been I think a default that we look west for leadership and we look west for innovation. There is an opportunity with a lot of what we are hearing, a lot of what we are seeing, for new climate leaders to be coming through on a global stage. And that's exciting because We need that, frankly. We need everybody to be leading here. But when you think about the financial institutions and the policymakers in the region against the current backdrop of political delinquency, and obviously this runway through to COP30 in Belém in Brazil, which is going to be interesting, I think is probably the understatement of the century. I think, all eyes are on Belém. Recognizing that environment, if you had one thing that you were going to ask financial institutions and policymakers in the region to focus on, to put all of their energy in, to accelerate the solutions for the climate and biodiversity crisis, what would it be and why? So Ed, I'm going to come to you first. Sorry, big question, Ed.
Well, if you won't help, then just step out of the way. So let others lead. So that's how I think it should happen. So I think that's happening. The political delinquency is a 6-year or 8-year delinquency, and it will soon. It is a temporary glitch because the world the long-term view has not changed. There's still some exigency. It's still an existential threat. I get whether you are from any part of the world, that existential threat will threaten you wherever you are, and governments will just have to toe the line and follow the consensus, the multilateral way of moving forward. So that's how I take it.
Thank you, Ed. And Tata, to you. Oh, Tata, you're on mute.
There are two things. The first one, the developed countries, we call it also the global north. I think still need to be accountable for climate change mitigation globally. So this is not charity, but this is part of the accountability from polluting, let's say, the countries in global north, and also industries. The second one, I agree that now we in the region, for instance, in South Asia, need leadership, regional leadership, and also national leadership, and also global south cooperation. So, for instance, we need to see the opportunity to work with, to collaborate with China, for instance, or with Middle East, for instance, for green transition. And also there is a key for us in South Asia, me from Indonesia, to see that climate change mitigation, climate action is also our national interest. So it's not like the interest of developed countries, the global north, but also our national interests, because currently climate change is not only the issue of environment, but also humanity and economic issue. Ed call it our existential. So it will affect our welfare, our economy. We can see in the last survey from World Economic Forum, in the next 10 years, 5 out of 10 global risks, the highest one is categorized as environmental risk. So I think that we need to do, and for this we need collaboration from industries, from the government, from academics, economists, think tank, media, and yeah, all stakeholders basically.
Tata, Ed, thank you so much. We have come to the end of our session. I could talk to you for hours, and Tata, we could probably talk for another good couple of hours on China and the role of China, obviously in the region. We're not going to. We have run out of time. That was full of really interesting insights and wisdoms, and I think some of what we picked up there was the opportunity for broader stakeholder engagement, recognizing the broader nature of stakeholders, whether, Ed, it's the faith-based community and the faith-based investors, in the Philippines and more broadly throughout the region, Tata, talking about, collaboration with China, leadership with China, leadership with the Middle East, new networks, new alliances, new platforms for collaboration, huge amount of opportunities there. I think I'm gonna leave the audience with a couple of things. I'm going to riff off a couple of things that you've said, Ed. It is very clear that in the region and globally, we need to green finance and we need to finance green. And you're either going to step up and do that, or you're going to get out of the way. And I think on that basis, we will thank the audience for obviously tuning in. Encourage everybody to just keep at it, keep doing what you are doing, be bold, be courageous. The world, the region needs you to be. Recognize that there is a lot of interest in your part of the region. There's a lot of exciting opportunity that's going on there. You have incredible people like Ed and Tata to call down on, for wisdom, for insights, for that, much needed collaboration. So keep the faith, keep the strength, and keep going. And on that basis, Ed, Tata, thank you so much again for your time. And back to you, Shireen.